The wind howled through the trees as the Thompson family, Sarah, her husband James, and their two children, Emily and Jack, arrived at the cabin. It was tucked away deep in the woods, far from civilization, perfect for a quiet weekend getaway. The cabin was old but charming, with creaky wooden floor. Away deep in the woods, far from civilization, a stone fireplace, and an air of solitude that felt both peaceful and unsettling. After unpacking, the family settled into the living room. The shadows outside grew longer, and a chill settled in the air as the evening wore on. Emily and Jack, restless, played games by the fire while Sarah and James prepared dinner. As night fell, the sounds of the forest intensified, the rustling of leaves, distant animal calls, and the occasional snap of a twig. Around midnight, Emily went to bed, but Jack insisted on staying up. He leaned against the window, watching the moonlight dance through the trees. His eyes, heavy with sleep, kept flickering back to the dark corners of the cabin. There was something in the shadows that didn't seem right. "Mom, Dad, did you hear that?" Jack asked suddenly, his voice shaking. James glanced up, his face a mask of confusion. "Hear what?" It's like whispers. They're calling my name." Sarah stiffened. She hadn't heard anything, but she wasn't about to dismiss it. "Maybe it's just the wind, Jack. Go to bed." But Jack didn't move. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. Sarah's skin prickled. "Jack, come on. It's late," she urged. But the boy was staring, wide-eyed, at the corner of the room where the shadows seemed to writhe and shift. James stood and crossed the room, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. "There's nothing here, buddy. Just the wind." But as he reached the corner, the temperature dropped, and a soft, ghostly laugh echoed through the room, sending a wave of cold fear into their bones. Suddenly, an object on the mantel shifted, just a small trinket, but it slid across the shelf as though pushed by invisible hands. Sarah gasped, her heart racing. "Did you see that?" she whispered, but when James turned to answer, his eyes went wide. The window beside him, once clear, was now fogged up with something or someone pressed up against the glass, obscured by mist. They could make out a figure, a shadowy outline that seemed to float, not bound by the laws of physics. "What is that?" James whispered, his voice tight with fear. A cold draft filled the room, and the whispers became louder, demanding, pleading, as if they were calling them to come closer. The family backed into the corner, their breaths shallow. Emily, who had been asleep in the room next door, stumbled into the living room, eyes wide with panic. "Mom, Dad, I saw something in my room, in the corner, standing by the window. It was just standing there, watching me." The whispers grew more insistent, and then for a moment everything stopped. Silence. The air was heavy, suffocating. James grabbed his family and rushed to the front door, desperate to leave, but the door wouldn't open. He tried again, and again. Nothing. It was locked from the inside. A deep, guttural voice filled the cabin, cold and disembodied. "You shouldn't have come here." Suddenly, the family was no longer alone. Figures began to materialize in the corners of the room. Tall, thin shadows with hollow eyes and twisted faces, their forms barely visible in the flickering candlelight. They stood motionless, watching. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she clutched her children. "What do you want from us?" she screamed, her voice trembling. The figure closest to her stepped forward, its face a blur of pale skin and dark, hollow eyes. "We want you." With a scream, Sarah lunged for the door again, but it still wouldn't budge. The shadows closed in around them, and the room grew colder, suffocating. Suddenly, Jack spoke, his voice eerily calm. This is the cabin's curse. It calls to you. Every family who comes here never leaves." The realization hit them like a wave. They weren't just trapped in the cabin. They were part of its past. The family had unknowingly crossed into a place where time didn't work the way it should, where the living and the dead existed together, frozen in an eternal loop of torment. As the shadows reached for them, Sarah and James turned to their children, but Jack was gone. He had vanished into thin air, as if he had never been there at all. In the flickering light, Sarah and James screamed, but their voices were swallowed by the thick, choking darkness that surrounded them. When the first light of dawn broke, the cabin was silent again, the shadows gone. Only the faintest whispers remained, lingering in the wind as if waiting for the next family to arrive. And as the forest returned to its stillness, no trace of the Thompsons could be found. The cabin stood undisturbed, its history continuing, just another chapter waiting to be written. What was real? What was a trick of the mind? No one would ever know.